On Father's Day, my daughter slapped me across the face and said her mother's ex-husband and new stepfather was her real dad. In that moment, 33 years of love shattered, but one sentence from me broke her down in tears, begging for forgiveness. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment telling me what time it is where you are right now. The knife froze mid-slice when I heard her voice. I'd been chopping carrots for my evening soup, the steady rhythm of the blade tapping against the cutting board filling the quiet kitchen. Steam curled up from the pot behind me, carrying the scent of chicken broth and thyme. Then the phone rang, slicing through my small domestic peace like steel. Agnes. My shoulders tensed instinctively. Maybe she was just calling to talk, the way she used to, the way daughters are supposed to. Hi, Dad. Her voice had that flat tone I'd come to dread. Look, I'll come to this Father's Day thing you've got planned, but I can't stay long. I set the knife down with care and wiped my palms on the dish towel looped at my hip. The steam suddenly felt heavy, suffocating. Of course, Agnes. I'll be glad to see you, even if it's just for a little while. I forced cheer into my words, the way I've learned to do. Right. I'll probably drive over around noon, but I'll have to leave by 3. I promised Mom and Eldon I'd help out with their garden party. Their garden party. Not our Father's Day. I stirred the soup absently, vegetables swirling in slow circles. The wooden spoon felt like lead in my hand. That sounds nice, I managed. I was thinking of making that roast you loved as a kid, the one with the herb crust. Just don't make that turkey from the 80s, okay? That thing was like sandpaper. She laughed, but without warmth. I'd never once cooked turkey for Father's Day. But correcting her would only make her retreat further. Of course not. I'll make something special. I turned down the burner, buying myself a moment to think. Maybe we could look through some photo albums while you're here. I found the ones from when you were little. Dad, I really can't stay long. 3 hours, tops. And that's stretching it. 3 hours. After a year of ignored calls and 2-line texts, 3 hours was what I was worth. I leaned against the counter, suddenly aware of how empty the kitchen felt. 1 bowl by the stove. 1 spoon. 1 everything. 3 hours sounds perfect. I lied. We'll make the most of it. Good. And Dad, maybe try to keep things light, okay? I don't want to spend the whole time talking about, your issues. My issues. As if missing my own daughter was just another complaint on a list. I closed my eyes, breathed in, counted to 3 like my therapist taught me. Absolutely. Just a nice, easy afternoon. Great. Okay, I've got to run. Eldon's calling me for dinner. Dinner. With him. At 7:30 on a Thursday. She was eating with my ex-wife and her husband, the man who had replaced me in every role that mattered. Give my regards to your mother, I said, though the words stung bitter. Will do. See you Sunday, Dad. The line went dead before I could reply. I stood there, phone pressed to my ear, listening to the dial tone blend with the bubbling pot. The carrots on the cutting board had already begun to dry, half-chopped, abandoned. Like everything else in my life. The soup still needed attention. There were dishes to wash, bills stacked on the counter, a dozen small tasks that kept me moving through my evenings. But I couldn't move. Not yet. I just stared at my reflection in the darkened kitchen window. 3 hours. After everything we'd shared, that's all I got. At last, I set the phone down and picked the knife back up. It felt strange in my grip now, heavier, but I kept chopping, precise, methodical, the same precision I'd honed in 40 years of engineering. Some habits don't leave you, even when everything else does. The soup would be ready in 20 minutes. I'd eat it alone, as always, while planning a meal for a daughter who couldn't wait to walk back out the door. I let the soup go. The vegetables could overcook. I didn't care. Her voice lingered in the room, that careless dismissal cutting deeper than outright rejection ever could. I drifted to the living room, pulled by something I couldn't name. On the bottom shelf sat the photo albums, exactly where I'd left them after my last round of self-inflicted nostalgia. My hand brushed over the leather spine of the oldest one, and I slid it free. Dust motes swirled in the lamplight as I sank into my chair. 5 years ago, it all began to unravel. First the job. Then the family. I'd repeated those words so many times, to therapists, to myself, to these empty walls, that they'd lost their edge, worn down smooth. But tonight, they cut fresh again, sharp and raw. I opened the album to a picture from 2019, our last real Christmas together. Lula wore the red sweater I had given her. Agnes had her arm draped over my shoulder, and in that picture, we all looked genuinely happy. That was before Eldon. Before the engineering firm decided I was expendable. Before my life unraveled thread by thread. The divorce papers sat in the other room, tucked away in my desk drawer with the other relics that marked the end of everything I once had. I didn't need to see them to remember. Yellow legal sheets, a faint ring of coffee staining the corner from that dreadful morning in the lawyer's office. My signature scrawled boldly, as if confidence on paper could stop my world from falling apart. I was 60 when they let me go. Too old to start over, too young to fade into retirement. The severance carried us for 8 months. 8 months of job applications swallowed by silence, while I watched Lula's patience dissolve like dew under sunlight. She began working late. Book clubs that stretched past midnight. Phone calls taken in hushed tones in the other room, her voice lighter, younger, belonging to a woman I no longer recognized. When she finally told me about Eldon, I wasn't even shocked. Just hollow. "He makes me feel like myself again," she'd said, as if 32 years of marriage had erased her identity instead of building it. "He sees potential in me." Unlike me, apparently, the man who had worked double shifts to put her through graduate school, who celebrated every step she climbed, every promotion, every milestone she reached. But potential doesn't pay the bills after the rug's been pulled from under you. I turned the pages of another album. Agnes at 10, missing her front teeth, grinning beside the treehouse I built her. Agnes at 16, rolling her eyes at my corny jokes, but unable to stifle her laughter. Agnes at 25, calling me for advice about her first real job, her voice alive with trust. When did that trust begin to rust away? It happened slowly, the way corrosion eats through steel. Calls grew shorter. Visits became obligations instead of choices. My advice faded into background noise while she parroted Eldon's words instead, the successful businessman who stepped into the role I'd once filled, after unemployment carved a hole in my life. From the kitchen came the familiar gurgle of the coffee maker, the sound I'd programmed into my evenings for comfort. I brewed coffee while my marriage collapsed, while Agnes's loyalty shifted toward a man who could offer what I no longer could: stability, confidence, a future free from uncertainty. I pulled out another album, this one from her college years. Her graduation photo showed her glowing between us, my arm looped around her waist, Lula clutching her hand. We had looked unshakable then, a team, a family. 2 years later, Lula was remarried. 6 months after that, Agnes started calling Eldon her bonus dad. The phrase made my stomach twist every time I heard it, as though fathers were spare parts you could swap out when the original wore down. The legal papers felt heavier when I finally lifted them from the drawer. Custody arrangements for a grown daughter, love reduced to a schedule, like a business deal. Property splits that left me with half of nothing. Alimony figures that assumed I'd ever find a job like the one I'd lost. I never did. The house settled around me, sighing with its familiar creaks, a lonely symphony for a 60-year-old man. I spread the photographs across the coffee table like tarot cards, searching for some glimpse of the future in faces that had once shone with nothing but love for me. One photo made me stop. Agnes at 7, chocolate ice cream streaked across her cheek, her tiny hand clutched in mine as we wandered through the zoo. Back then, I was her hero, her protector, her first love. Now I was an obligation squeezed into her calendar before more important plans. A fated father she endured out of duty, not devotion. I carefully returned most of the photos to their albums, but I kept the zoo picture, holding it up toward the lamp's light. Agnes's gap-toothed grin beamed back at me, pure, trusting, entirely mine. 3 hours on Sunday. That's what I'd been given. I'd take it. The picture trembled in my hand as I sank deeper into my chair. She couldn't have been more than 7 in that moment. Chocolate smeared like war paint on her cheek, her little fingers gripping mine with absolute faith as we stood before the elephants. I remembered every detail. The gasp she made when the baby elephant trumpeted. How she insisted I carry her on my shoulders all the way back to the car. "You're my superhero, Daddy," she'd whispered into my ear, arms tight around my neck. "You're the strongest man in the whole world." The strongest man. The bitter irony almost made me laugh. By 12, she was defending me to classmates who teased her about my beat-up Honda. "My dad's car is vintage," she snapped, chin high, stubborn as a soldier. "It's got character." That was my streak in her, the refusal to bend when something mattered. High school brought different battles, but she still came to me first. Crushes gone wrong, college applications, big dreams, she laid them out for me like blueprints. Even when Lula dismissed her ambitions as impractical, Agnes came to my workshop, perched on the workbench, and shared every hope. "You always believe in me, Dad," she said one night, her voice soft with certainty. "Even when I don't believe in myself." I set the photo down and wandered through the house, brushing my fingers over the places where her presence still lived. The kitchen table where she once did homework while I cooked dinner. The living room corner where she practiced violin, torturing our ears with screeches until one day the music finally soared, sweet and clear. In the back of my closet, I found a shoebox stuffed with Father's Day cards she'd made me over the years, construction paper hearts in bright colors, childish handwriting declaring me the best dad ever in thick crayon letters. Each one signed with extravagant swirls, as though her 7-year-old autograph carried the weight of a royal decree. She used to call me her hero. Where had that little girl gone? The answer lurked in more recent memories, the ones I avoided turning over too often. Agnes at 28, brushing off my advice in favor of something Eldon had said. Agnes at 30, asking me to help with her down payment but adding, almost casually, that Eldon had already covered most of it. Agnes at 32, the first time she referred to him as more like a real father. That phrase had landed like a punch to the chest. I had raised her since she was 2, when Lula and I adopted her from the foster system. I taught her to ride a bike, sat through every school play, stayed up with her through fevers, nightmares, and broken teenage hearts. I was there for every scrape, every triumph, every tear. Yet in just 3 years, a man who bought his way into our lives had somehow become more real than the father who had loved her unconditionally for 3 decades. From the kitchen, the timer chimed. My soup was likely ruined. I didn't care. I was adrift in the wreckage of what I thought unshakable. Eldon had advantages I never did. Money for extravagant vacations. Connections that opened doors I couldn't. A kind of confidence that comes only when you've never questioned your place in the world. When Agnes finished her MBA, he hosted a celebration at his country club. When she earned a promotion, he took her to restaurants whose names I couldn't pronounce, much less afford. I offered what I could. Simple meals, long walks, a steady presence. But constancy doesn't photograph well for Instagram. It couldn't compete with vineyard tours in Tuscany or networking events with industry leaders. The distance grew faster after I lost my job. Agnes's phone calls shortened. Her visits became perfunctory. She'd show up at holiday dinners only to spend most of the time texting or taking calls from her bonus family about plans more exciting than mine. I was just a warm-up before the main event. And so, I planned Sunday's menu with the desperation of a man running out of chances. I chose her old favorites: garlic mashed potatoes, green bean casserole, chocolate chip cookies she used to help me bake. I hoped familiar flavors might stir familiar feelings, remind her of who we had been together. I even brought out the good china, Lula's old set, and laid 2 places at the dining table. Optimist or fool, I couldn't tell. 3 hours. That's all I would have. 3 hours to compress 33 years of fatherhood into something she might carry with her. The grandfather clock struck 10:30. I should have gone to bed, but I knew sleep would not come. With the zoo picture still in hand, I turned off the lamp and headed for the stairs. Agnes's room waited at the end of the hall, preserved as she'd left it 5 years ago. Sometimes I stood in that doorway and tried to remember what it felt like when coming home meant coming to me. 3 hours to prove I still mattered. 3 hours to fight against years of erosion. I climbed the stairs slowly, knees aching with the hour. Tomorrow I would shop for ingredients, scrub the house until it gleamed, and brace myself for my daughter's brief return to a life she had long outgrown. But tonight, I only held her picture and wondered if love could be enough, when everything else had failed. The next afternoon found me in the garden, hands deep in soil, tearing weeds out with more force than they deserved. All morning I'd replayed Thursday's call, dissecting every word, every pause. 3 hours. She'd said it like she was offering me medicine, carefully rationed. But still, she was coming. And that had to be enough. A car door slammed. I froze, mid-tug on a stubborn dandelion. No deliveries were due, and no one ever came unannounced. Through the gap in the fence, I caught a flash of silver. Agnes's Audi. My heart pounded. I dropped the trowel and wiped my dirty hands on the rag in my pocket. She never arrived early. She never arrived uninvited. I rounded the corner just as she strode up the walkway, portfolio case in hand, sharp blazer hugging her frame. Her heels struck the cracked concrete with sharp precision. Dad? She stopped at the step, eyes flicking from my grass-stained knees to my soil-caked fingers. We need to talk. Seriously. Of course, sweetheart. I fumbled with the keys, suddenly aware of how worn my front door looked next to her polished presence. Come in, please. She settled onto the living room couch and snapped open her portfolio with crisp efficiency. Charts and graphs spilled across my coffee table like the blueprints of a campaign. Her eyes gleamed with a fire I hadn't seen in years. I've been developing something incredible, Dad. A digital marketing consultancy for small businesses. She tapped a pie chart with one manicured finger. The market is wide open: mom-and-pop shops, local services, family-owned restaurants. They're struggling online, and no one's helping them. I leaned forward, confused but genuinely drawn in by her energy. That sounds promising. You've always had a knack for spotting opportunities. Exactly. Her eyes lit up. I already have 3 potential clients just from preliminary conversations. She flipped to the next page, where neat charts displayed revenue forecasts. Even on conservative estimates, I'll be at 6 figures within 18 months. The numbers blurred before me: monthly recurring revenue, acquisition costs, margins. The vocabulary of a world that had moved far beyond my engineering days. This is impressive, Agnes. Truly. I traced the upward curve of her graph with my finger. But what does this have to do with? I need $100,000 for my startup. The words landed like a punch. My coffee cup trembled, the liquid sloshing dangerously near the rim. 100. I set the cup down carefully, stalling for time. That's a considerable investment. She was already nodding, sliding more documents across the table. 2-year office lease, professional-grade equipment, initial marketing push, legal fees, it's all accounted for down to the penny. I opened my mouth, but no words came. The figures seemed to swell in the silence, filling the room, pressing against my chest. Dad, I know it's a lot. She leaned in, urgency sharpening her tone. But this opportunity won't wait. Another firm is circling the same niche. If I don't act now, they'll take the clients. Have you tried the banks? Looked into business loans? The question left my lips automatically, though my mind was still spinning. Banks want revenue history and collateral I don't have. You know how they are with startups. She waved the idea away. But family investment is different. It's about believing in potential, not just numbers on a spreadsheet. Family investment. As if I were some Rockefeller, rather than an out-of-work engineer scraping by on a modest pension. I've run every projection, she pressed on. Break even by month 14, profitability by month 20. These aren't daydreams, Dad. They're based on real market research. Her words kept coming, steady and relentless, as she laid out acquisition strategies and competitive advantages. I nodded when it felt expected, murmured encouragements, all the while doing my own math in silence. $100,000. My entire savings amounted to $25,000. Even if I sold what little I own, maybe, I could push that to $40,000. So? She leaned back, eyes shining with expectation. What do you think? I looked at her, at the excitement animating her face, at the meticulous paperwork spread across my table, at my daughter, who still believed in me enough to ask. The weight of it all pressed against my ribs. I'll try to figure something out, sweetheart. Her smile flared so brightly it felt like it could power the whole house. I knew you'd come through. You always do. She began packing her materials with brisk efficiency. But I'll need an answer by Sunday. Monday at the latest. The office lease won't stay open. Sunday. Father's Day. The irony burned. I understand. I managed. Time-sensitive opportunities demand quick choices. I helped her stack the papers, my hands moving automatically while my brain clawed at impossible solutions. Thanks, Dad. This means the world to me. I'll finally be able to prove myself. I walked her to the door and watched her stride back to her Audi, every step radiating confidence. At the driver's door, she turned, waving with absolute faith that I'd find a way to make the impossible happen. Then she was gone. The car disappeared around the corner, leaving me standing in the doorway, her business plan clenched in my soil-stained hands. The afternoon sun glared too bright, the silence of the neighborhood too absolute. $100,000. I had promised my daughter the moon when I could barely afford a candle. The folder felt heavier with each step toward my office. I passed the family photos lining the hallway, smiling faces forever frozen in moments when I'd still been enough. Now they seemed to mock me. My office was nothing more than the smallest bedroom, repurposed after the divorce when I couldn't afford the bigger house. The old wooden desk groaned under my weight as I sat down and spread Agnes's documents beside my outdated computer. While it booted with its familiar, weary whine, I reached for my reading glasses and opened the cabinet marked banking. $25,000. That was all I had. The number had been echoing in my mind since Agnes left, but seeing it in black and white made my stomach twist. 5 years of disciplined savings since the divorce, every small sacrifice, every skipped dinner out, every postponed purchase, had built this modest sense of security. My checking account showed $3,047, monthly expense money, carefully rationed to last until the next pension deposit. The savings account held $18,500, my pride, my shield against emergencies. In the small safe behind my desk sat $3,100 in cash for when banks weren't accessible. Total liquid assets, $24,947. Rounded up, $25,000. Still $75,000 short. I opened my retirement account next, watching the ancient browser crawl toward the page. $127,000 glared back at me, but it might as well have been on the moon. Early withdrawal penalties would devour nearly half, and the IRS would demand explanations I couldn't give. My old calculator, worn smooth from decades of engineering, clicked under my fingers as I tried numbers that refused to improve. Home equity, maybe $85,000, but selling would take months and leave me without a roof. My Honda might fetch $8,000 on a good day. The furniture Lula had left behind could bring in a few thousand at estate sales. Even stripping myself bare, I couldn't reach Agnes's target. One by one, I opened accounts I already knew by heart, double-checking balances as though repetition might change them. The slow internet connection dragged each page onto the screen like a sentence being read aloud. Each number confirmed what my gut had known the instant Agnes spoke those 3 words. 100,000 was impossible. The afternoon sun slanted through the narrow office window, catching dust motes that hovered over stacks of financial statements. Once, I'd been proud of these modest accounts. After the divorce, rebuilding $25,000 had felt like triumph. Now it looked like failure. I remembered the day I opened that savings account, the teller congratulating me on a fresh start. Each deposit had been deliberate, $200 here, $500 there, birthday checks from distant relatives, the rare consulting overtime. Watching that balance crawl upward from nothing had restored a sliver of dignity. Agnes used to be impressed by smaller gestures. $5,000 for her first car down payment. $3,000 for her first apartment's security deposit. Even $1,000 had once seemed generous, enough to earn long calls of gratitude. But that was before Eldon. Before she saw what real money could accomplish. I lifted the landline and stared at the keypad, unsure of who to call. My contact list had thinned after the divorce, along with everything else. Old colleagues had scattered with layoffs and relocations. Neighbors were little more than names on mailboxes. Family members carried struggles of their own. The safe behind me held more than cash: the deed to the house, insurance policies, my father's will, paperwork proving ownership of everything I'd managed to cling to. But even bundled together, they couldn't span the gulf between my daughter's dreams and my reality. The coffee from that morning sat cold beside the keyboard, a brown ring marking the desk where condensation had pooled. The wall clock ticked steadily toward 5 o'clock, each second pulling me closer to Sunday's deadline. I pushed back from the desk and rubbed at my eyes under my glasses. The numbers blurred, but the math stayed mercilessly clear. $25,000 available. Maybe another $10,000 or $15,000 if I gutted everything, took penalties, sold off my life. Still not enough. But I had promised Agnes I would figure something out. She'd driven away confident in my ability to conjure miracles, the way fathers were supposed to, the way I always had before, when the problems were smaller and the solutions within reach. I picked up a pen and began writing figures on a yellow legal pad, as if putting them in my own handwriting might reveal a hidden path. $100,000 needed. $25,000 available. $75,000 gap. The gap looked even wider on paper. Saturday morning found me at the kitchen table with coffee, a dwindling contact list, and a thin strand of hope. I had spent Friday night drafting names, anyone who might conceivably help. Sleep had been scarce. I rose before dawn to prepare for what felt like the most important day of my life. The coffee was too strong, my nerves too frayed, but I needed the caffeine to steady my hands. By 9 a.m., I was walking into First National Bank. Documents tucked under my arm like shields against the rejection I knew was waiting. The loan officer, a young woman who could have been Agnes's peer, leafed through my paperwork with professional politeness. Her smile couldn't hide the skepticism in her eyes. "Unfortunately, Mr. Cruz, your credit rating is acceptable, but not outstanding." She slid the report across the desk. "And without steady employment income, securing a loan of this size is nearly impossible." I had expected it, but hearing it confirmed still landed like a fist to the chest. "What about a home equity line of credit?" I asked. "That's possible," she replied, consulting her screen. "But the process usually takes 4 to 6 weeks. Even expedited, you're looking at a minimum of 3. And we need a current appraisal, income verification, debt-to-income calculations." 3 weeks. Agnes needed an answer by Sunday. By 11 a.m., I was driving across town to meet Jerry, an old colleague from the engineering firm. We'd worked side by side for 15 years before downsizing scattered us like leaves in the wind. The coffee shop he chose was nearly empty, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, vinyl booths cracked from decades of use. "Winfred, I'd help if I could, but things are tight everywhere." Jerry stirred his coffee, eyes fixed on the swirling liquid instead of me. "Sarah's medical bills wiped us out last year. I might be able to pull together $2,000, 3 if I stretch. 2,000. I thanked him sincerely, but the number felt like trying to drain the ocean with a teaspoon. The drive to Mike's place took 40 minutes through quiet neighborhoods that mirrored my own, rows of modest homes owned by people living modest lives. Mike had been my college roommate, my best man when I married Lula. If anyone would understand, it would be him. His living room was warm but unpretentious, decorated with family photos of grandchildren I'd never met. We drifted apart after the divorce, the way friendships sometimes do when life redraws the map. 5,000, he said after I explained Agnes's situation. That's what I can realistically manage. But I'd need 2 weeks to move the money without losing a chunk in penalties. 2 weeks. Another impossible deadline in a day full of them. I wish I could do more, Winfred. That's a hell of a lot of money to raise overnight. He walked me out to my car, shaking his head. Maybe she should start smaller? Work her way up. But Agnes wasn't thinking small. She was thinking the way Eldon had taught her. Big dreams, fast timelines, success measured in 6 figures instead of careful steps. The antique shop was on a corner I'd driven past countless times without noticing. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the scent of forgotten belongings. The owner, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses, examined Lula's jewelry box with clinical detachment. The pearls are cultured, not natural. Maybe 400. He set them aside and picked up my father's watches. These Timexes, if the mechanisms work, 600. I had hoped for thousands. He was offering hundreds. The wedding china sparked more interest, nearly 2,000 for the full 12-piece set. But holding those plates, I saw Lula setting them out for our first Thanksgiving as newlyweds. Some prices were too steep to accept. Altogether? Maybe 5,000, if you're patient and wait for the right buyers. He gestured around his crowded shop. But if you want quick cash? 3. I drove home as evening light stretched across the streets, rerunning numbers that wouldn't budge. Jerry's possible $2,000. Mike's $5,000 in 2 weeks. Antiques, maybe $5,000 more. Even in the best-case scenario, I was still $40,000 short. The driveway felt like a dead end. I sat in the car for several minutes, calculator in hand, punching in totals that never improved. Savings, $25,000. Friends, $7,000. Antiques, $5,000. Maximum possible total, $37,000. Still $63,000 short. No way around it. I could sell everything, call in every favor, empty every account, and still fail Agnes. Walking toward the house, it seemed smaller than ever, heavy with the knowledge that tomorrow I would have to let my daughter down. The business plan waited on my coffee table where I'd left it, pages of charts and projections built on the assumption her father could deliver miracles. But miracles required resources I never had. Sleep had been restless, spent rehearsing how to tell her the truth. I had prepared a simple Father's Day lunch, hoping the gesture would soften the blow. Turkey carved, table set with my best china, everything arranged to cushion my failure. At noon sharp, the doorbell rang. I wiped my hands on a towel, forced a smile, and walked to the door, bracing for the conversation ahead. But when I opened it, my world tilted. Agnes stood smiling in the center, but at her sides, like bookends, were Lula and Eldon. My ex-wife avoided my eyes. The man who had replaced me in every meaningful way scanned my home with open interest. "Surprise, Dad?" Agnes beamed. "I brought Mom and Eldon." The words struck like a splash of ice water. I staggered back a step, my carefully constructed day unraveling into nightmare. "Hi, Winfred." Lula's voice carried a brittle brightness. "I hope you don't mind." Eldon stepped forward uninvited, his eyes scanning my modest hallway. "Charming little place. Very cozy." Cozy the way one describes a child's playhouse, or a budget bed and breakfast, not a grown man's home. "Of course not," I heard myself say, muscle memory of courtesy kicking in despite the shock. "Please come in." They filed past me, and suddenly my living room, once adequate, felt claustrophobic. Eldon moved with the confidence of entitlement, brushing a finger over a book spine, straightening a frame, then lowering himself into my armchair, as if it had always belonged to him. Agnes spun in the center of the room, arms open wide. "Isn't this perfect? All my family together for Father's Day." All her family. The words cut sharper than she intended. Lula perched on the sofa's edge, purse clutched to her lap like a shield. "Your father's made this place very nice, Agnes. Very comfortable." Another soft-edged adjective. Comfortable. The word you used for furniture you settled for when you couldn't afford beautiful. "I thought this would be good for everyone," Agnes continued, blissfully unaware of the tension buzzing in the room. "Family bonding, a chance to really connect." Connect, as if Eldon and I weren't rivals, circling the same center of gravity. I fled to the kitchen, calculations spinning. The turkey might stretch to 4 if carved thin. Vegetables barely enough. I set out extra plates with trembling hands. My carefully arranged, intimate meal had become a hasty dinner party. "Need any help in there?" Agnes called. "No, no. Everything's fine." The lie came easily, though nothing was fine. My day, my plans, my dignity, all hijacked by this ambush. Through the doorway, I watched Eldon prowling my shelves, examining titles with the scrutiny of an appraiser. He'd moved my favorite lamp to a new spot, claiming the prime place near the window. Lula chatted brightly about the neighborhood, her tones so artificially light it nearly floated. "Did they ever finish the construction on Maple Street? Such a nightmare when I drove through." When she drove through. Past tense. This wasn't her neighborhood anymore. I carried in drinks, the tray rattling slightly in my grip. Eldon had made himself completely at home, feet propped on my coffee table, the TV remote dangling casually from his hand though the screen stayed dark. "This turkey smells wonderful," Lula said, accepting her glass with fingers careful not to brush mine. Agnes bounced between them, a diplomat at a fragile summit, ensuring everyone was comfortable. Everyone was content. Everyone but the host. "The dining room's this way," I said, gesturing. "Everything's ready." As they passed, Agnes squeezed my arm. "Thank you for being so gracious, Dad. I know surprises aren't your favorite, but I thought it would be wonderful to have us all together." "Wonderful for whom?" I wanted to ask, but her glowing face left me mute. The dining table, set for 2 with care, now looked woefully inadequate for 4. I scrambled to add place settings while they claimed their seats. Eldon took the head of the table, my chair, without hesitation. Agnes slid in beside him, orbiting naturally. Lula settled opposite, leaving me the last chair at what was suddenly the foot of my own table. The hierarchy established itself before we'd even said grace. Not that grace would be suggested. I'd learned long ago not to introduce anything that might make my ex-wife's new husband uncomfortable. Later, stepping onto the back patio, I finally turned to Agnes. Inside, Lula's voice drifted through the open window, making polite observations about my flower beds. Eldon's deeper tones followed, already offering unsolicited expertise on landscaping decisions I had made alone. "Why did you bring them here, Agnes?" Her arms crossed defensively, the same posture she'd used as a teenager when cornered. "Eldon wanted to see your house. Mom, too. This was supposed to be our day. Our time together." My voice stayed low, mindful of how sound carried in small spaces. 3 hours, remember? Her chin lifted with practiced defiance. "That's all you had? I thought this would be better. More meaningful. Like a real family gathering instead of just an obligation." Obligation. The word lingered, bitter smoke in the air. I walked further down the garden path, away from the windows where they might overhear. Agnes followed, her heels clicking against the stones I'd laid by hand 5 years ago. "You planned this," I said. It wasn't a question. The surprise bringing them both. This wasn't spontaneous. She fiddled with an earring, an old tell she'd never lost. "Eldon thought it would be good for everyone to spend time together. You know, blended family bonding." Blended family? Another phrase that erased me. What did you tell them about our conversation yesterday? I pressed. About your business plans? Nothing yet, she said quickly, glancing back toward the house to be sure we weren't overheard. I wanted today to go well first. You know how Mom gets about business talk. Relief washed through me, chased instantly by a fresh wave of dread. If Agnes hadn't brought up the money yet, then that conversation was still waiting, only now, with an audience. Agnes, about what we discussed yesterday. We'll talk about it later, Dad. She cut me off gently. Right now, I just want everyone to get along. She glanced at her watch, an expensive piece I didn't recognize. Besides, there's plenty of time to work out the details. Work out the details. As if my financial ruin were nothing more than a scheduling hiccup. A burst of laughter carried from inside, Eldon's voice, smooth and amused at some remark I couldn't hear. Agnes smiled instinctively at the sound. He's really trying, you know, she said softly. This isn't easy for him either. Coming to his, she faltered. Well, to your house. His what? His wife's ex-husband's house. Territory already conquered. The hesitation revealed more than a finished sentence ever could. I appreciate the effort, I lied. But next time, perhaps a little warning would be. There won't be a next time if today goes badly. Her tone sharpened. I'm trying to build something here, Dad. Something that works for everyone. But that takes flexibility. From all sides. All sides. I'd been reduced to a negotiating party in my own life. I thought you'd be happy. She pressed on, warming to her theme. Having your family here for Father's Day. Isn't that what fathers want? Their children surrounded by people who love them. People who love them. Evidently that circle now included Eldon. Through the kitchen window, I saw him opening cabinet doors, inspecting shelves, charting my home like a general surveying occupied ground. Lula lingered at his side, torn between stopping him and avoiding friction. Your phone's buzzing, Agnes said, nodding to my pocket. I pulled it out, 3 missed calls from Jerry, the colleague who'd promised to help with a loan. My pulse hammered. I should take this, I murmured, but Agnes was already moving back toward the door. Don't be long, she called over her shoulder. Lunch is getting cold, and Eldon hates cold food. Eldon hates cold food. In my own house, my preferences had become secondary to those of a man who had simply claimed a seat at my table. I followed her, the weight of the phone in my pocket tugging at me like an anchor. Whatever Jerry had to say would have to wait. For now, I had to step back into my dining room and play host to the people slowly dismantling my bond with my daughter. Just before we re-entered, Agnes turned again, her expression earnest. I really hope this works out, Dad. For everyone's sake. The warning beneath her words was unmistakable. Sometimes you just have to adapt to new family dynamics. That's how life evolves. Life evolves. My role had evolved from father to supporting cast in my daughter's carefully managed family drama. The voices inside grew louder as we reached the door. Eldon was holding forth, his tone carrying the weight of a man accustomed to attention. Lula laughed politely at the right beats, playing her part. Agnes pushed the door open with practiced cheer. Lunch is ready, everyone. I stepped in behind her, noting how seamlessly she'd slipped into the role of co-host under my own roof. Eldon rose from examining my spice rack. Lula carefully set down a photo of Agnes's graduation she'd been studying with a guarded expression. The dining room seemed to shrink as we crowded around my small table. I'd managed to squeeze in the extra settings, but the mismatched chairs and tight quarters betrayed my solitary inadequacy. Eldon dropped easily into the head seat, my seat, without hesitation. Agnes slipped into place beside him. Lula sat across from her, leaving me the last chair at what had become the foot of my own table. This looks wonderful, Winfred, Lula said, her voice carrying a brightness that felt practiced. You always did know your way around a turkey. Turkey's a little dry, Eldon added, dissecting the meat with clinical precision. But not bad for home cooking. Most people overcook it. Easy mistake without proper equipment. I've managed fine, I answered, more defensive than I meant to sound. 5 years of practice helps. Agnes shot me a quick warning glance while neatly cutting her portion into careful bites. Curious how you manage such a large place alone, Eldon continued, his gaze sliding over the dining room like an appraiser. Must be quite the burden, maintenance-wise. It isn't that big, I replied evenly, spooning cranberry sauce with hands I willed to stay steady. Just right for one person. Still, heating all those rooms in winter, property taxes on a house this size. He gestured toward the crown molding, likely running calculations in his head. Economically speaking, something more compact would make better sense. Agnes laughed, the sound sharp in the confined room. Eldon's always thinking about efficiency. It's why he's so successful in business. Successful in business. Unlike her father. Lula tried to rescue the mood, her cheerfulness just shy of desperate. The neighborhood's kept its charm, though. Those oak trees must be 60 years old. Mature landscaping definitely adds value, Eldon agreed smoothly. Although I did notice the gutters could use work. And that front step has quite a crack developing. Every remark landed like a carefully placed blade. My home wasn't just being observed, it was being judged as evidence of decline. Proof I couldn't properly care for what I owned. I kept carving the turkey, the knife growing heavier in my hand. The meal I'd prepared with care was reduced to an inventory of shortcomings. Dad always makes the best holiday meals, Agnes offered, though the words carried little conviction. Remember that Christmas stuffing, Mom? With the chestnuts? That was wonderful, Lula agreed quickly. You always put so much thought into the little things. Details matter, Eldon observed, reaching across me for the salt without asking. Though sometimes it's smarter to delegate. Professional catering, for instance, saves time for more important matters. More important matters than a father cooking for his daughter. The implication hung in the air, heavy as perfume in a crowded room. Agnes glanced at her phone, then looked around the table with satisfied approval. This is exactly what I wanted. All my parents together, sharing a meal. All her parents. With that phrase, my demotion was complete, from father to one member of a committee. Wine would complement this nicely, Eldon mused, eyeing his water glass with faint disapproval. Perhaps a good Pinot Noir. We've got an excellent bottle we brought back from Sonoma. Their shared travels, their combined tastes, they're seamless. Us. I'm not much of a wine drinker, I admitted, though in truth I'd enjoyed it often during my marriage. Finances had simply moved it from habit to luxury. A shame, Eldon replied, smiling without warmth. A solid wine education opens doors. Business dinners, client events, social connections, it's really essential in today's market. Today's market. A world where I no longer competed, where men like me were relics of an earlier, less polished age. Conversation flowed around me, occasionally through me, as though I were an elderly relative offered polite inclusion. Agnes grew more animated with each minute, describing her work, her plans, her bright future, one supported by people fluent in today's market. When dessert was mentioned, the frozen pie I'd stashed in the freezer thawed and passed off as an afterthought. I realized the performance was far from finished. The phone in my pocket buzzed again. Jerry. His third call. Persistence meant urgency. But I couldn't step away now, couldn't abandon my post while Eldon catalogued my home and my failures with effortless precision. Coffee sounds perfect, Agnes announced, standing to clear plates with practiced efficiency. Dad, you sit. Mom and I will handle cleanup. Even the cleanup was reassigned, my authority undercut at every turn. I remained at the foot of the table while Eldon leaned back in my chair, surveying his conquered territory with quiet satisfaction. Soon Agnes would circle back to the money. And when that moment came, I'd have to lay bare my failure in front of the man who'd already replaced me in every other way. Coffee cups cooled on the table as Agnes checked her watch, her expression glowing with contentment. We should stay a little longer, she announced, easing back into her chair beside Eldon. Make this a proper family afternoon. The look they exchanged carried a chill that sank straight through me. This wasn't casual hospitality. This was planned, staged for a moment I hadn't yet seen coming. With practiced drama, Eldon slipped a hand into his jacket. His fingers closed around something that brought a smile to his face. The motion carried the weight of ceremony, like a magician preparing his final reveal. Actually, Agnes, before we get too comfortable. He drew out a folded check, flourishing it as though he were on a game show. I have something for you. The paper made a sharp, deliberate crack as he set it down on my table, right beside the spreading coffee stain. Even upside down, the numbers were impossible to miss. $100,000. Agnes, here's a check for $100,000, seed money for your startup. Her gasp was real, hands flying to her mouth. She hadn't known. She hadn't been part of this little performance. Eldon, I can't believe this. She bolted up, throwing her arms around his neck, pressing her face against his shoulder. Thank you, Dad. You're such a real father. A real father. The words landed harder than any blow could. I stared at the check, my own meager savings screaming through my mind in neon humiliation. $25,000. That's what I had managed, after 5 years of scrimping, of sacrifice, of carving a life down to the bone. I have $25,000. I blurted. The words tumbled out raw, small, desperate. The room stilled. Agnes spun toward me. The joy vanished from her face, replaced by something sharper, something I'd never seen before, pure contempt, sharpened by years of quiet disappointment. 25,000? She laughed, the sound brittle, humorless. That's it. That's what 33 years of being my father amounts to? I tried to explain, about the banks I'd approached, the friends I'd asked, the antiques I'd considered selling. But she was already advancing, her fury rising like a storm. You never loved me! The accusation detonated, shaking the room. All these years I thought you cared, but you can't even do what Eldon does without blinking. He is my real father. He proves it every single day, while you sit in this sad little house, counting pennies. The slap came so fast I barely registered the movement. Crack. The sound snapped through the dining room like a gunshot. Pain seared across my cheek, and the copper tang of blood filled my mouth where a tooth had cut my lip. Silence followed. Even the house seemed to pause, holding its breath. Lula gasped, hand clamped over her mouth. Eldon froze, shocked that his display of dominance had ignited something he hadn't intended. Agnes stood above me, chest heaving, palms still stinging from the strike, eyes ablaze with righteous fury. I stayed seated, head turned from the blow, heat radiating across my skin. The coffee cup toppled when I flinched, its contents spreading into the stain already marking the tablecloth. Such a small, meaningless detail, yet burned into my vision in a moment that changed everything. Slowly, deliberately, I reached for my napkin. I dabbed at the blood on my lip. The white fabric came away marked in red. Evidence. Not just of pain, but of the final break between us. 33 years, bedtime stories, scraped knees patched, proud applause at plays and graduations. Erased in an instant, dismissed with one strike of her hand. But as I sat there, tasting iron, feeling the burn on my face, something inside shifted. The blow was meant to finish me. To prove I was irrelevant. Instead, it severed the last tether holding me back. It freed me. I rose slowly, unfolding to my full height. Agnes glared, still convinced she held all the power. Eldon sat watching from my chair, the satisfaction on his face dimmed by the violence he had helped set in motion. Lula's eyes darted between us, horror dawning as she recognized the stranger in her daughter's fury. The check lay abandoned on the table. Its numbers meant nothing now. I carried something more valuable than money, the truth. The truth that would shatter everything Agnes thought she knew about love, family, and what it meant to have a father. I wiped the blood from my lip with deliberate care, each movement reclaiming the dignity stolen by her hand. The room seemed to shrink in silence. Agnes stood before me, chest still heaving, sure she had ended me with her strike. Eldon remained seated, his earlier bravado fading. Lula trembled as though finally seeing the cruelty behind her daughter's face. I straightened fully, eyes locking on Agnes. My voice was calm, steady, unshaken despite the taste of blood. "You're right, Agnes," I said. "I'm not your real father." The words lingered in the room like smoke after an explosion. Agnes's defiant mask faltered, her anger dissolving into confusion. "What? What do you mean?" I let the silence stretch, watching as realization began to take root in her eyes. 33 years of secrecy were about to collapse under the weight of a few sentences. "We took you from the orphanage when you were 2. Her face strained of color. The hand that had struck me moments ago now trembled against her chest. "That's not possible." Her voice cracked. "You're lying." "Mom, tell me he's lying." But Lula's tears were already flowing. She shook her head slowly. "It's true, sweetheart. We wanted to tell you, but the years slipped away, and it never seemed like the right time." Agnes's legs gave out. She reached for her chair, missed, and stumbled back against the wall. The thud echoed through the room. 2 years old," she whispered. "All this time, I never. Your birth parents couldn't care for you," I said, my voice steady, my words precise. "Social services placed you with us. We loved you from the moment we saw you, tiny, terrified, clutching a ragged stuffed rabbit." Eldon's smugness vanished. He sat frozen in my chair, only now realizing he'd waded into a family history far deeper than he understood. "For 33 years I've been your father, not by blood, but by choice." My voice grew stronger as I spoke. "Every nightmare I comforted. Every scraped knee I patched. Every play, every graduation, every proud moment. None of it came from obligation. All of it came from love." Agnes slid down the wall until she was sitting on the floor, her elegant clothes wrinkling, her carefully styled hair unraveling. "You chose me," she whispered. "Every single day." I knelt beside her, ignoring the ache in my knees. "When you were 5 and feared the monsters under the bed. When you were 16 and thought the world ended because Tommy Morrison didn't notice you. When you graduated and called me crying with joy. Every day, Agnes, I chose to be your father." Tears blurred her eyes, washing away the fury that had consumed her. "But Eldon, he gave me money." "Money?" I gestured toward the forgotten check on the table. "He gave you paper. I gave you a name. A home. A family. An identity. I gave you 33 years of love for a child who wasn't mine by biology, only by the choice that mattered." Lula stepped forward, her tears falling freely. "We thought about telling you so many times, especially after the divorce, but you were already struggling." We didn't want to add another wound. Eldon finally spoke, his voice stripped of its earlier authority. "I didn't know." "Agnes never said anything?" "Because she didn't know," I answered. "No one outside this family ever did. Not the neighbors, not your teachers. Only the lawyers and the caseworkers knew, and they were sworn to silence. To the world, you were always our daughter." Agnes's shaking fingers reached toward the mark her slap had left on my cheek. "You let me strike you. You let me call you a failure. You let me say you weren't my real father." I caught her hand gently. "Because I wanted you to see the difference between biology and fatherhood. Eldon married your mother and got you in the bargain. I chose you before I ever laid eyes on you. Sight unseen, because you needed someone." The check rustled in the draft, absurdly loud in the charged silence. Its zeros meant nothing against 3 decades of chosen devotion. Agnes stared at me with new eyes, finally seeing the man who had fought to bring her home, who had loved her without condition, who had worried, sacrificed, and celebrated every step of her life. "I struck the man who saved me from an orphanage," she whispered, her voice cracking under the weight of it. Her sobs broke the silence, heavy and unrestrained, as she stayed crumpled on the floor. I remained kneeling beside her, patient, letting her grieve the truth of her life. Lula hovered nearby, torn between her instinct to comfort and her guilt for withholding the truth. Even Eldon, deflated, sat mute, the performance stripped from him. At last, Agnes lifted her tear-streaked face to mine. All those years, you never told me I wasn't your blood. But you loved me anyway. You were never not my blood, I said softly. You became my blood the moment I signed those papers. Biology starts the story. Love is what makes it a family. She struggled to her knees, her hand trembling as it brushed the marks she had left on my face. Oh, what have I done? Forgive me, Dad. The word Dad carried a weight it had never held before, not dismissal, but truth. You loved me without knowing. You chose me when my real parents couldn't. You saved me from whatever might have happened if I'd been left in that system. I helped her to her feet, my old knees protesting, but my heart felt lighter than it had in years. You've always been my daughter, Agnes. Always. She threw her arms around me with desperate intensity, the embrace of someone who had nearly lost everything precious and only just realized its true value. I'm so sorry, she whispered. I compared you to him, like money could measure love, like providing was the same as caring. Over her shoulder, I glimpsed Eldon, still frozen in my chair. The check remained on the table, crisp and bright, yet forgotten by everyone in the room. All his wealth, all his displays of superiority, were meaningless compared to the bond forged over 3 decades of chosen devotion. Can you forgive me? Agnes murmured against my shoulder. For hitting you, for saying terrible things, for not seeing what you really gave me? There's nothing to forgive, I replied, smoothing her hair the way I had when she was small and afraid. You're my daughter. Loving you means loving you even when you forget who we are to each other. Lula moved closer, her tears finally slowing. We should have told you years ago. We were afraid it would change how you saw us, how you saw yourself. Agnes pulled back to look at both of us. It does change things. It makes everything bigger, more meaningful. You didn't have to love me, but you chose to anyway. She turned toward Eldon, who was examining the tablecloth with uneasy intensity. I'm sorry for putting you in this position. I asked both of you for money without realizing, without understanding what I was really asking. He nodded stiffly, clearly out of his depth. The check is still yours if you want it for the business. Agnes glanced at the paper, then back at me. I don't think I need it anymore. Not like that. Maybe I need to start smaller. Build something myself instead of looking for shortcuts. Pride swelled quietly in my chest, not the desperate pride of a man proving his worth, but the calm satisfaction of watching someone you love make a wise choice. Your father would be proud of that decision, Lula said softly, and for the first time in 5 years she meant me. The afternoon light shifted through the windows, casting long shadows across the dining room, a space that had been broken and rebuilt in a single day. The coffee stain on the tablecloth would remain, a permanent mark, but now it would serve as a reminder of how we had found our way back to each other. Agnes stepped back from our embrace, still holding my hand. I know this doesn't fix everything immediately. I have 33 years of taking your love for granted to make up for. We have time, I said simply. That's what family gives you. Time to get it wrong, and try again. Eldon cleared his throat awkwardly. Perhaps we should head home. Give you two some space to talk. Agnes nodded, then turned to him with unexpected kindness. Thank you for wanting to help with the business, and for showing me what I was really looking for in a father. I already had it. As they prepared to leave, Agnes hugged me once more, longer this time, without the desperate edge of before. Happy Father's Day, Dad, she whispered. My real father. After they left, the house felt different, not empty, but peaceful. I cleaned the coffee stain, put away the dishes, moving slowly and savoring the quiet. The check still sat on the table, left by Eldon, but it seemed smaller now, insignificant compared to what really mattered. Tomorrow, Agnes would call, and we would begin rebuilding what we had nearly lost. Tonight, I would sit in my chair, and remember the weight of her arms around me, and the sound of her calling me Dad with a newfound understanding of what the word truly meant. If you enjoyed this story, Please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. To hear the next story, click the box on the left. Thank you for watching.